So we're talking about this position where black is going to play d6 or g6. g6 is more common, but sometimes they start with d6. It has a slight different set of ideas compared to g6. We have looked at similar setups with d6 and g6 earlier in the first video of c4, e5, which was about 2 g6 and then various moves like d6, g6. It's very comparable. Here just the knight is always on c6 from the get-go. In those other variations it's usually stayed on b8 for a while. Yeah, so d6 and g6. Let's start with d6. We're going to play knight c3, and now black usually goes bishop e6. That's the idea of this somewhat quicker queenside development with d6. Of course black can also play f5. It's a very flexible way of playing here. I recommend rook b1, just as I do against the g6 setups, like knight f6 and b4. White makes pretty quick progress here on the queen side. Normally they play bishop e6. That's the idea. Quickly play the bishop out, and after d3, covering the c4 pawn, black goes queen to d7. One idea of this is that bishop h3 is an option whenever white moves the knight from g1. Yeah, but we don't want to develop the king side quickly anyway. Our main focus is to make progress on the queen side, so rook b1 is very consistent. Yeah, normally now black goes g6. He has to develop the king side somehow, and we're going to gain space here on the queen side. Black drops back to d8 with his knight. Yeah, this is I think a pretty comfortable position for white. We have seen this quite often. The diagonal is very strong. We've got pressure against this pawn. Yeah, what should white play? My main suggestion here is to move knight to d5, that we will look at soonish. Another idea that I like is to move e4. I know I just said that the diagonal is strong. Why would white want to play e4? It's not a bad move, e4. It gains lots of space in the center and clamps down on those squares. White has more space. This setup, c4 and e4, is typically known as the Botvinnik setup, and is a good starting point if you want to play on the flanks. Here white actually already has played b4 to b5 and gained lots of space there. I think this is a very decent alternative. Knight d5, however, is probably the more logical move. It just puts the knight in the middle of the board and asks black, okay, how are you going to play against this piece? It is a strong piece there on d5, and black has a hard time to tolerate it for very long. Usually he will play c6, and usually immediately. He can of course start with the move like knight e7, but at one point or another he will play c6. So let's look at c6 immediately. Takes, and we go back to c3. Yeah, it looks a bit strange. Maybe we have invested time and now we have to go back, but we've gained something. The b file is open now, so rook b1 has a real purpose now. Let's say f5 and queen to a4. And I think that white can be quite satisfied with this position. He has this open file already. He's got pressure on the queen side, and bishop to a3 is a good option for that c1 bishop. As I said, I believe white is comfortable here. You have to be a bit cautious here. It's a typical problem that this knight is unprotected. Don't play something like that and be embarrassed. So I think this is a good position for white. This early queenside development is not so popular. They usually play g6. Okay, knight c3, bishop g7, and now here's a big parting of the ways in terms of a setup to choose. I'm going for rook b1 in this video. I like this option a lot. Yeah, white will gain space on the queen side quite quickly and has a clear plan there on that side of the board. It is not the only move here. Moves that I have tested in my own games are e4 and e3. I've played those. e4, as I said, is the Botvinnik setup, and it's a very decent alternative for white. Yeah? Clamping down on the center, and later we will go here and have ideas to play later b4 or f4. It's often the start of playing on the flanks if you close the center. This was also the recommendation of Romanian Grandmaster Marine in one of his English opening books. E3 is also an option, a move that I have played also in the past, going to E2 next, and only then choose what setup to play on the queen side. Sometimes white plays rook b1 and then b4, or sometimes they just play d3. Also an interesting alternative. So if you happen to dislike the rook b1 setups, there are lots of good alternatives here. Yeah, rook b1. Black has a fundamental decision now to make, to play a5 or not to play a5. Do you want to open up the a file or not? We will start with black not opening the a file and going d6 or f5 immediately. I think personally that a5 makes quite some sense, but not everybody agrees. So we'll see. f5, yeah, is an alternative. One idea of starting f5 immediately here could be to delay the move d6 and potentially have d5 in one go later. Sounds a little bit strange at the moment because white is on that square a lot, but we'll see what I'm talking about. Let's say b4, knight f6, d3, castles. Yeah, and now we will see an idea to play d5. If white goes b5 now, which is perfectly okay, but after knight e7 we see that this could become an option. Queen b3, king h8, e3, and now c6, knight e2, d5. Black gets this in, yeah, in one go. Is that a problem for white? No, it isn't. White has good play on the queen side. This kind of position, I think, looks quite favorable for white. The bishops are both very strong and the black center is rather weak. Yeah, this is a position here after move 14, and along the way there are lots of alternatives. Both sides have many options there. In those kind of setups, like the closed Sicilian reversed, there will always be many alternatives available, and it's very difficult to cover this in a video on a move-by-move base. Like you play this and now black has 7 options. Yeah, this is already the end of a chess video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some typical continuations and show you some ideas. You can combine them in many ways, depending on individual move orders. So what I'm trying to say is, look at this video, watch this video, and after that maybe go into a database and look at some games and see how the various middle games unfolded. It makes much more sense to do this than try to memorize moves on a single position base. Yeah, like here black has 7 moves, nobody can memorize that. Yeah, it's better to understand what the setups look like. Here black can also play knight d4. Yeah, and my recommendation is e3 and knight e2. This is often a good answer to the knight coming to d4, d6, castles, g5. Well, black seeks play on the king side, and here I'm recommending f4. This is a very typical reply to black playing a setup with those 3 pawns, and something to memorize. This is almost an automatic reaction to this kind of black attacking idea. And thing to remember is that for some strange reason, and I cannot really tell you a rational explanation for that, it is usually best if black captures to recapture with the other pawn. Like the g-pawn captures, you take back with the e-pawn, or the e-pawn captures, you take back with the g-pawn. As I said, I cannot really tell you why this is, but it is the usual way in these kind of setups. So if you have a situation like that, please think independently and make your own mind up what you want to do. But keep in mind that this is usually best, so it's probably the one to check first. And if it looks fine, go for it. It will probably be the right continuation. So this was the move f5 after rook b1. Black can also play d6, yeah, committing to d6, but still not playing a5. Yeah, a typical continuation: b4, a6, d3, f5. Yeah, here it's interesting. How should white develop the king side now? Problem is, in this particular position, knight f3 wouldn't work because of this. Yeah, again, this motif is something to remember. The knight is unprotected on c3. So here e3 is correct. Knight f6, and this is something that we have seen before, this kind of setup. Queen to b3, yeah, looking at the king, king h8, a4, g5, and again f4. Yeah, typical reaction, very comparable to the position compared to the position that we've seen earlier. White has made lots of progress on the queen side, and with f4 has stopped black's play on the king side. But most of the time, black after rook b1 will play the move a5 to make sure that the a file opens. So a3, d6, b4, takes, and now a big parting of the ways. Black can play with f5 or without f5. It's really impossible to tell what's better. It's just a little bit different, those two setups. Knight f6 will be my main move here in the presentation, but f5 of course is possible. By the way, if we quickly jump back after rook b1, of course black can also play knight f6 immediately here. Yeah, this is certainly a possible option, and this will sometimes happen from King's Indian move orders. Yeah, if you imagine black starting with knight f6 and we're going to play knight c3 and g3 and so on, then this could easily happen. The way it unfolds is very comparable to our main lines with a5, a3 inserted. So like b4, d6, b5, knight e7, d3, castles. We can also play with e3, but be careful about d5. So knight f3, yeah, it's kind of comparable to our later main line. It's just that the a file is closed here, and this gives white some additional options. In particular, bishop a3 and c5 can become an idea. But let's go back to a5. This is, as I said, the main continuation. And here the parting of the ways is f5 or knight f6. So let's look at f5. First we're going to play b5, kick the knight back, and now again we have a choice, e3 and knight e2 or knight f3 setups. Both is possible. Yeah, I will go for e3 here, but I'm going to show you that this is also totally okay. This kind of setup, castles, f6. And yeah, here I recommend to play with bishop b2 and rook a1. I think white is slightly better here. It's very comparable to the position without the f-pawn being moved actually, because the queen side is totally identical and white's play is on the queen side. There's not a big difference there. However, e3 is also possible, and here it will develop like this. And again, the queen comes to b3, the bishop will in many cases come to a3, and we will have the same situation that we've seen earlier. Black has to be a bit careful here that he is not overexpanding. We shouldn't underestimate that he has played many pawn moves, and the pawns here are more exposed than white's pawns, like d6. There's a square weakness on e6 as well, and white has this very compact position where there's no attackable weakness. I think white is a bit more comfortable here, but black certainly is not in terrible shape. Yeah, he's not going to lose in a couple of moves. Yeah, this is f5. At knight f6 is going to be the main continuation that I'm looking at here. Yeah, what to do here? My recommendation is to play like this. And here, after knight e7, white has to be a bit careful, as e3 is not so great. Black can play d5. This is something to remember. If you play this very slowish e3 setup and you have no pressure on that pawn, black might play d6, d5. This is a bit uncomfortable now, as the positions opens up and white is not so well developed, especially kingside. So here white has to go knight f3. If you want to play knight to e2, you would have to start here and make this decision here. Start with e3. This is definitely possible. First e3, then the knight here, and only later play d5 at a more appropriate moment. If you play b5 immediately, you're committed to knight f3 in case of knight e7. Black can also go to d4 again. We've seen this idea. And against this you can basically always reply like that. I personally don't think that the knight is too great on e6, but okay, black plays like this sometimes. So back to the knight to e7. Yeah, here knight f3, as I said, e3 d5 is something to be avoided. Yeah, here black wants to develop his bishop, and bishop e6 is going to be awkward because of knight g5. So h6 is the absolutely almost only move in the position that is ever played. Yeah, castles, bishop e6, and now white has a couple of options. I like the move bishop b2. This has mostly two ideas, putting the bishop on b2. One is to play the move c5 sometimes. This is in particularly this move c5 is quite interesting because it opens up the queenside position and the center here quite quickly. The idea c5 is actually even more interesting if the a file is still closed. You could easily imagine this position happening with still the a pawns on the board, where black never played a5. There bishop to a3, and then here c5 becomes an even more interesting option. Here bishop b2 is of course, bishop a3 is not working, the a file is open. It's one of the reasons why I think it makes sense for black to have this a file open. Yeah, what should black play now? Queen d7 is the most popular move. He can also play something like this, knight to d7. Yeah, maybe freeing up the f pawn. Let's look at a typical continuation. Knight d2, c6, the b7 pawn was hanging, and then rook a1. Yeah, trying to gain control over the a file and then potentially invade. Yeah, what should black play? He could play d5. This has been played in a grandmaster game, the Ganyan Kuzmin, but white I think was better here after queen b3. White has quite some pressure on those pawns, and in the game, Kuzmin played the somewhat obliging continuation here, d takes c4. After knight takes, white was just very comfortably better. Very strong knight now on c4. This is all a bit weakish, and especially the queenside pawns are targets. Alternatively, he could have played e4 here. Black, it was a little bit better, but still after those captures here, white is better. The pawn is weak, and the e4 pawn controls important squares. Yeah, I think this is a very typical continuation. Black has to be careful that he is not like overstretching his position. That was knight d7 and then d5. Alternatively, black of course can play more conservatively with queen c7, but again I think we should play on the queen side. Queen b3, and here bishop a3. Again I think white is a little bit better. Yeah, we have more chances on the queen side than black has in the center and on the king side. He's very far away from any attack, and it's a little bit one-sided, I think, this play. That was knight d7. Black can also, if we jump back to the position after bishop b2, black can also play the move queen to c8, very comparable to queen d7. Let's look at a typical continuation. Rook a1, takes, bishop h3, and now queen a5. This is a good position of the queen. It looks at the c7 pawn and makes some pressure there. After this, for example, knight d7, white plays bishop a3, looking at this square, and I think white is a little bit better here. He will always have some annoying pressure on the queen side so that black doesn't get much going on the king side. I think I would prefer white here, at least slightly. Queen to d7 is a little bit more logical as the rooks are connected immediately. Yeah, I think rook a1 is a good option here. Try to invade on the a file. Yeah, black can try to avoid this and play rook b8. Just give away the a file immediately and keep the rooks. Here I think that both e4 and queen b3 are pretty good. e4 is a good move to control the center here, but queen b3 is maybe the more logical option. After bishop h3, the move c5 is interesting. I already mentioned that this is an interesting option, and here after this and this, g5, knight a4, knight g6 and b6, white has made lots of progress on the queen side. Also a nice example how quick this initiative can unfold. I think white here is in quite good shape. normally black plays bishop h3. He doesn't go away with the rook to b8. And here again queen b3 is my recommendation. Black will trade queen e6. Knight to d2, all looks kind of normal. Knight d7. That was the idea behind queen to e6, freeing this this square for the knight. Yeah, and here you have a choice between a more risky continuation and a more conservative one. The conservative one first is to take and play rook a1. In a position like that, I think white is very slightly better, because on the queen side you still have chances, while without the rooks here you're not going to get checkmated on the king side. This is a position to very slowly grind away, let's say. Yeah? It's not much. Black is very solid, but you have your chances, I think, that are a little bit more realistic than black chances are. A bit more interesting is the move rook a3 here, trying to fight for the a file. For example, after f5, rook a1, rook takes, queen takes, white has gained the a file with still one rook on the board. However, what you have to keep in mind, here you have got all your pieces on the queen side. You have chances there, queen to a5, queen to a7, but keep in mind that you also have a king that you have to protect, so this is a bit more risky than the other continuation. All in all, in the closed Sicilian reversed, black has a fairly solid position. You cannot expect to get a huge advantage in this line. What I definitely recommend is to go through a number of master games to get a better grasp of the ideas. It's a bit difficult here to learn it on a move-by-move basis, because there are so many different move order permutations. It's very difficult to learn that move by move. Just try to see